She thought she was going to die. Iona Redfeather had never been so certain of her fate. The hunters closed in, their shadows growing longer as the evening sun dipped below the horizon. She had nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Her breath came in shallow gasps, the weight of her fear pressing down on her chest. Her back was against the rock wall, the deep ravine behind her offering no escape. The men were getting closer, and Iona's heart raced. She knew what was coming. She had heard stories of people like her, captured, punished, or worse. She thought of her family, her tribe. The thought of them finding out what happened to her. It broke her. But then, just when she thought it was all over, she heard it. Hooves. The sound of a horse's gallop echoing through the canyon. The hunters froze. Their eyes darted around, confusion spreading through them. Who could it be? Was someone coming to finish the job? Iona barely had time to look up before a figure appeared on the ridge above her, silhouetted by the fading light. He was tall, strong, and, despite the danger surrounding them, his presence seemed almost reassuring. Iona couldn't believe her eyes. A cowboy? In these parts? The man didn't hesitate. He spurred his horse forward, his movements confident and precise. The hunters looked at each other, unsure of what to do. But the cowboy didn't wait for them to make up their minds. With a quick draw of his rifle, he fired a shot into the air, the sound echoing through the canyon like a thunderclap. The hunters backed off. They knew better than to engage with someone like him. For a brief moment, the world seemed to stop. Iona's heart slowed, the adrenaline draining from her limbs. She didn't know whether to thank this stranger or run from him. Was he here to help, or was this some twisted game? The cowboy rode down the slope, his horse steady under him, until he was just a few feet away. He dismounted, his boots thudding against the dirt. "You all right?" he asked, his voice steady, but there was a hint of concern in his eyes. Iona wanted to speak, to thank him, but the words stuck in her throat. She was still too shaken. The cowboy offered a hand, his palm open, waiting. Iona hesitated for a moment before reaching out. She took his hand, and he pulled her to her feet. The touch was firm, but gentle. He helped her onto his horse, then swung up behind her. The sound of the hunters retreating echoed in the distance, but Iona didn't turn to look. She couldn't. She was still in shock. As the cowboy guided the horse up the steep path, Iona couldn't help but wonder who this man was. Why did he help her? What did he want? She knew nothing about him. But as they rode together into the fading light, Iona felt something shift inside her. Could this be the start of something new? Something that would change everything? The ride was long, the air cold, and the landscape unfamiliar. Iona clung to Jesse's back, her body sore from the earlier confrontation, but there was something about the steady rhythm of the horse that made her feel safer than she had in hours. The sound of the horse's hooves against the dirt was the only noise between them, the wind whispering through the trees as they moved deeper into the wilderness. Jesse didn't speak much, but his presence was enough to calm her racing thoughts. She kept her eyes on the path ahead, not daring to look back. The hunters could still be following. "We're far enough for now," Jesse said after a while, breaking the silence. His voice was low but steady, the kind of voice a man had when he'd seen enough to know how to stay calm in a crisis. Iona didn't respond. Her mind was too full, too chaotic. She had so many questions. Who was this man? Why had he saved her? She had heard the stories about cowboys, how they were dangerous, how they could never be trusted. Yet here she was, riding with one, not knowing what to expect next. As they continued, Jesse guided the horse through a narrow pass, the trees thick around them. It was a secluded spot, one that felt miles away from the civilization Iona had known. The further they went, the more isolated she felt. It was as if they were disappearing into the wild, where no one could find them. She shivered, but it wasn't just the cold. She was beginning to feel the weight of being alone with someone she knew nothing about. She glanced over her shoulder, but all she could see was the faint outline of the ridge they had crossed. The hunters were gone, for now, but the uncertainty still lingered in her chest. "You can rest," Jesse said, noticing her fatigue. "We'll make camp for the night." She nodded, still unable to find her voice. They stopped by a small creek, its waters rushing over the rocks. Jesse dismounted first and then helped Iona down. She winced slightly as her feet hit the ground, the strain of the day's events catching up with her. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Jesse looked at her, his expression unreadable. "It's the least I could do," he replied, unstrapping a small bundle from the side of his horse. He quickly set up a small campfire, the crackling sound of the firewood adding a comforting warmth to the otherwise cold air. Iona watched him move with ease, his actions deliberate and calm. For a moment, she just observed him, her mind trying to make sense of everything. Jesse wasn't like the men she had heard about in stories. He didn't seem dangerous, at least not in the way she had been taught to fear. He was a cowboy, yes, but there was something more to him. He wasn't a hero. But then again, heroes didn't always look the way they were supposed to. As night fell, Jesse set out some simple food by the fire, a piece of bread, some dried meat, and water from the creek. Iona ate in silence, her mind still running in circles. She was thankful for the food, for the warmth of the fire, but there was something unsettling about this situation. She wasn't used to relying on anyone, especially not a stranger. When they finished eating, Jesse spoke again, his voice softer this time. "I'll stay up for a while. You should sleep." Iona didn't argue. The exhaustion from the day's events had caught up with her, and her eyes were heavy. As she laid down by the fire, the warmth of the flames fighting off the chill of the night, she found herself staring up at the stars, the quiet of the wilderness settling around her. She had no idea where this path would lead. She didn't even know who Jesse really was. But for the first time in a long while, she felt like she could breathe. And maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone as she thought. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Iona stirred. She had slept fitfully through the night, the sounds of the forest and the crackling of the campfire filling her dreams. The fire had burned low, casting shadows that danced across the ground. Jesse was still sitting near it, his face illuminated by the fading embers. He had kept watch as promised, his eyes alert but calm. Iona slowly sat up, wincing slightly from the soreness in her muscles. The air was cool, but the warmth from the fire was still comforting. Jesse looked over at her, a soft smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Morning," he said, his voice deep but gentle. Iona nodded, rubbing her eyes. She hadn't realized how much she needed rest until now. "Thank you for last night," she said, her voice quiet. Jesse didn't respond right away, instead reaching for his gear to pack up the camp. "No need to thank me. Just doing what anyone would do," he replied, though there was a quiet humility in his tone. Iona didn't believe that. She had heard of cowboys before, how they were ruthless, how they cared only for themselves. But Jesse was different. He wasn't like the stories. She wasn't sure what to make of him yet. Her instincts told her to be wary, but a part of her couldn't help but trust him. The silence stretched between them as they packed the camp. Iona's mind raced, still trying to piece together the events of the past 24 hours. She had been on the run, desperate and alone, when Jesse had appeared. He had saved her life. And now, here they were, riding together through the wilderness, with no clear destination in mind. What was she supposed to do now? The weight of her responsibilities to her people pressed down on her chest. She needed to find them, to warn them. But how? She didn't even know where to start. Jesse seemed to sense her unease. "You want to talk about it?" he asked, looking over at her as they rode side by side. Iona hesitated. She had never been one to open up to strangers. But something about Jesse's presence made her feel like she could. "I don't know where to go," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "My people, my tribe, they're in danger. I need to warn them, but I can't do it alone." Jesse nodded thoughtfully. "You're not alone," he said simply. The words were enough to make Iona's heart tighten. She didn't know why, but she believed him. He wasn't just talking about the physical danger. He was offering something more, something she hadn't realized she needed until now. Iona looked at him, studying his face for any sign of doubt or hesitation, but there was none. His steady gaze met hers with an understanding that almost seemed to go beyond words. "Thank you," she said again, this time more firmly. Jesse smiled, the first real smile she had seen from him. "No problem. We'll figure it out together." The day stretched on as they rode through the wilderness, the path winding through dense forests and over rocky terrain. They spoke little, each lost in their thoughts. Iona couldn't shake the feeling that their journey had only just begun. She had no idea where they were heading, but for the first time in a long while, she wasn't afraid. She was with someone who would help her, someone who would stand by her side. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give her hope. She glanced at Jesse again, her thoughts racing. Could this really be the beginning of something new? Something that could change everything? The journey continued through the rugged wilderness, the landscape shifting with each mile. Iona and Jesse rode in silence, the weight of unspoken thoughts hanging between them. Iona's mind was consumed with the pressing danger to her people. Every step they took seemed like another moment slipping away. The path was narrow, winding through dense trees that whispered in the wind. The air felt thick with anticipation, and Iona couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, though she saw no one. Jesse seemed to sense it too. He glanced over at her, his expression unreadable, but there was a quiet intensity in his gaze. "Something on your mind?" he asked, his voice steady but not unkind. Iona hesitated. She had been holding so much inside for so long, afraid of trusting anyone. But with Jesse, something was different. She had no words for it. I don't know what to do next," she admitted. "I don't know where my people are." "The hunters," her voice faltered. "They could be anywhere." Jesse nodded slowly. "We'll find them. You're not alone in this." His words were simple, but they carried a weight that made Iona's chest tighten. She couldn't remember the last time anyone had said those words to her. She had always carried the burden alone, the leader of her people, expected to know what to do at all times. But now, in this strange partnership with a cowboy, she was beginning to realize how much she had been missing. Jesse turned his horse slightly, his gaze ahead as he scanned the terrain. "The thing about the land," he said after a long pause, "is that it tells you where to go, if you know how to listen." Iona looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" "It's the small things," he explained. "The way the wind moves, the way the animals act. If you pay attention, you'll see things." Iona considered this for a moment. She had always trusted her instincts, her connection to the earth. But with everything happening so fast, she hadn't had time to listen to the land. She closed her eyes briefly, allowing herself to feel the quiet hum of nature around her. The soft rustle of leaves, the distant call of a bird. Slowly, she opened her eyes and nodded. She understood now. The land wasn't just something to traverse. It was something to understand, something to read. As they rode on, the path before them opened up to reveal a wide clearing, the forest giving way to tall grass that swayed gently in the breeze. The sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting a golden light over the landscape. Iona felt the tension in her shoulders ease as they entered the open space. "We should rest here," Jesse said, pulling his horse to a stop. "It's too dangerous to travel further in the dark." Iona agreed, though part of her felt the weight of time pressing on her. They didn't have much left, but exhaustion had begun to settle in, and there was something comforting about the stillness of the clearing. As Jesse set up camp, Iona watched the sun slowly set, the sky turning a deep shade of orange. She felt a strange sense of peace wash over her, though her mind was still filled with worry. There was too much at stake, too many lives depending on her. Jesse worked in silence, his movements fluid and purposeful. When he was finished, he sat down by the fire, the crackling flames casting shadows across his face. Iona joined him, her legs stiff from the ride. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice carrying more than just gratitude. It was an admission. She had never been one to rely on others, but here she was, trusting him more than she had trusted anyone in a long time. "You don't have to thank me," Jesse replied, his voice soft but firm. "We're in this together now, and I'll help you see it through." The fire crackled, the warmth of the flames a small comfort against the cool night air. Iona sat back, her thoughts momentarily quiet. For the first time since the chaos had started, she felt like maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward. It wasn't certain. It wasn't guaranteed. But with Jesse by her side, it was a path worth following. As the night settled around them, the stillness of the clearing was broken only by the crackling of the fire. Iona sat on the ground, staring into the flames, her mind racing with the weight of everything she had yet to face. Jesse had already settled in for the night, his back resting against a tree, eyes closed but still alert. Iona glanced over at him, his silhouette barely visible in the dim light. She could hear his steady breathing, calm and rhythmic. It was a strange comfort in the midst of the chaos that surrounded them. The firelight danced across his face, casting long shadows that made him seem like a man lost in his own thoughts. For a moment, she wondered about him. Who was he really? What had brought him to this remote corner of the world, helping a stranger like her? She wasn't sure what to make of him yet, but she knew one thing. He wasn't like the others. He didn't carry the arrogance of the settlers she had encountered, nor the distrust that most cowboys had for her people. Jesse was different. He had proven that with every small gesture, every quiet word. He hadn't asked for anything in return. He simply helped. Iona shook her head, trying to push aside the thoughts swirling in her mind. There was no time for distractions. She needed to stay focused, to find her people and warn them before it was too late. But as the fire flickered, she realized something else. She wasn't as alone as she had thought. Maybe, just maybe, Jesse was the ally she needed. "You all right?" Jesse's voice broke the silence, his eyes opening to meet hers. Iona nodded, offering a small smile. "Just thinking," she replied softly. Jesse didn't press her further. Instead, he sat up straighter and tossed a few more logs onto the fire, the flames dancing higher. "We'll get through this," he said, his voice steady and confident. "You'll find your people. And when you do, I'll be there to help." His words were simple, but they carried a weight of truth that Iona hadn't realized she needed to hear. She believed him. "Thank you," she whispered, the words more heartfelt than she had intended. Jesse gave her a small smile before returning his gaze to the fire. They sat in silence for a while, the crackling of the fire the only sound between them. Iona's thoughts drifted back to her tribe, to the danger they faced, but for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to feel a flicker of hope. She wasn't alone. The night stretched on, the stars overhead shining brightly in the vast, dark sky. Iona felt the weight of the world on her shoulders, but for the first time, it didn't feel quite as heavy. She had someone by her side, someone she could trust, and together, they would find a way to stop whatever was coming. As the fire began to die down, Jesse stood and stretched, his movements slow but deliberate. "We'll need to keep moving at first light," he said, his voice low but firm. "But we can rest here for now." Iona nodded, her eyes following the embers as they drifted into the night sky. She had no idea where their journey would take them, but she knew one thing for certain. She was ready to face whatever came next. With Jesse by her side, she wasn't afraid. The fire flickered once more before fading into the dark, and the night embraced them both in its quiet, uncertain stillness. Iona closed her eyes, letting the sound of the wind lull her to sleep, the promise of the morning a distant hope on the horizon. The next morning, the first rays of sunlight filtered through the trees, casting long shadows on the ground. Iona woke to the soft rustling of leaves, the quiet murmur of the creek nearby. She had barely slept, her mind still racing with the uncertainty of their situation. Jesse had already packed up most of their things, the sound of him moving around the camp breaking the silence. He glanced over at her, his expression calm as always. "Ready to go?" he asked, his voice steady. Iona nodded, though she wasn't sure if she was truly ready. The weight of her responsibility still hung heavily on her shoulders. As they mounted their horses, Iona couldn't help but glance around, her eyes scanning the trees, the distant horizon. Every shadow seemed to hide something, every noise felt too close. She was still on edge, the tension of the previous days refusing to release its grip on her. Jesse noticed her unease and slowed his horse to ride beside hers. "You all right?" he asked, his voice softer now. Iona met his gaze, feeling the weight of her thoughts press down on her. "I don't know where to go next. My people, they could be anywhere. The hunters could be right behind us." Jesse's brow furrowed slightly, but he said nothing at first. They rode in silence for a moment before he spoke again. "We'll figure it out," he said simply. "One step at a time. You don't have to do this alone." Iona looked at him, the sincerity in his words cutting through the doubt that had clouded her mind. She had spent so long thinking that she had to carry the burden alone, but now, with Jesse by her side, something shifted. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like she didn't have to face it by herself. "Thank you," she whispered, the words barely escaping her lips. Jesse nodded, offering her a small smile. "No need to thank me. We're in this together." They rode for hours, the land stretching out before them, endless and unforgiving. The path was rough, winding through dense forests and rocky terrain, but Jesse led the way with ease, his experience in the wilderness guiding them. Iona followed closely behind, the rhythm of the ride slowly easing her nerves. She tried to focus on the present, on the journey they were making together, rather than the dangers that still loomed on the horizon. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Iona felt a growing sense of resolve. They couldn't stop now. She had to find her people, warn them of the danger, and protect her tribe. Jesse's steady presence beside her was a constant reminder that she wasn't alone in this fight. She stole a glance at him, his face set in a determined expression as he rode ahead. There was so much about him she didn't understand, but one thing was clear: he was more than just a cowboy. He had become a partner in this fight, someone she could rely on when everything else felt uncertain. As they reached the edge of a dense forest, Jesse slowed his horse and looked back at her. "We need to be careful from here on out," he said, his voice low. "This is territory that's been known to have raiders. We don't want to run into any trouble." Iona nodded, her senses alert. She had been on edge for so long that the thought of encountering more danger seemed almost inevitable. But she wasn't afraid, not with Jesse by her side. They moved cautiously, the forest growing thicker around them, the trees casting deep shadows on the path. Iona's mind raced with thoughts of her people, her tribe. What would they do if they knew she was coming? Would they welcome her, or would they see her as a threat? She didn't know the answers, but she had to find out. As the day wore on, the landscape began to change, the trees thinning out and giving way to rolling hills. The air was cooler now, the wind picking up as the sun began to dip lower in the sky. Iona could feel the weight of the day on her shoulders, but she pushed forward, determined to keep going. Jesse, too, seemed unaffected by the growing fatigue. His movements were smooth, his focus unwavering. She admired his resilience, his ability to keep going no matter what. As they reached the top of a hill, Jesse paused and looked out over the valley below. Iona joined him, her eyes scanning the land. Far off in the distance, she could just make out the outline of a village. Her heart skipped a beat. Was it her people? The thought filled her with both hope and fear. They had made it this far, but what would await them when they arrived? From the top of the hill, the valley stretched wide and quiet, too quiet. Iona narrowed her eyes, her breath slowing as she studied every detail below. Smoke should have been rising from cooking fires. Horses should have been grazing near the edges. Movement, voices, life. Instead, there was stillness, the kind that did not belong to a living place. "Something is wrong," she said softly, more to herself than to Jesse. He did not answer right away. His gaze moved slowly across the valley, measuring, reading, the same way he had read the land before. Then he nodded once. "Yeah," he said. "It is too quiet." The wind brushed across the tall grass around them, bending it in long waves. Iona felt it then, not fear, not yet, but a tightening in her chest, like the land itself was holding its breath. She urged her horse forward a few steps, then stopped again. "If they are there," she said, "I need to go." Jesse turned his head slightly toward her. "And if they are not?" Iona did not answer, because that was the question she had been avoiding since the moment she saw the valley. She swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around the reins. "I have to know." Jesse studied her for a long second, then gave a small nod. "Then we do it careful." He guided his horse down the slope, not straight toward the village, but along the ridge line, keeping to higher ground where they could see without being seen. Iona followed, her eyes never leaving the valley. The closer they got, the heavier the silence felt. No birds, no distant voices, just wind and dust. Half a mile out, Jesse raised a hand. They stopped. He leaned forward slightly in the saddle, focusing on something ahead. "Tracks," he said quietly. Iona leaned closer, trying to see. The ground below showed faint marks, not fresh, but not old either. Too many to count. Horses, wagons, movement in and out. Her pulse quickened. "My people do not move like that," she said. Jesse nodded. "I figured." They rode a little closer, slower now. Every step felt louder than it should. Iona's breathing became shallow, controlled. Her instincts were screaming now, not to run, but to be ready. They reached a line of rocks overlooking the village. Jesse dismounted first, then helped her down without a word. They moved forward on foot, careful, quiet. When Iona finally saw the center of the village clearly, she stopped. Her body went still. Nothing was destroyed. Nothing was burning. But it was empty. Completely empty. The lodges stood untouched, as if everyone had simply walked away. Her heart dropped. "No," she whispered. Jesse stayed beside her, saying nothing, because there was nothing to say yet. Iona stepped forward slowly, her feet moving before her thoughts could catch up. They would not leave, she said, her voice barely holding together. Not like this. Jesse crouched near the edge of the slope, studying the ground again. Then he reached out and picked something up. Iona turned. In his hand was a small object. A piece of cloth. Worn. Familiar. Her breath caught. She stepped closer, her hand trembling as she took it from him. It was part of a sash. One she recognized. Someone from her tribe. Someone close. She closed her eyes for a second, steadying herself. Then she opened them again, different now. Sharper. They did not leave, she said, her voice low, certain. Jesse looked at her. Then what happened? Iona clenched the cloth in her hand, her gaze fixed on the silent village below. They were taken, she said quietly. The wind moved through the empty lodges, carrying dust across the ground like whispers. And for the first time since the journey began, Iona was not just afraid. She was certain of one thing. This was not the end of the road. It was the beginning of something far bigger than either of them had expected. The silence did not feel empty anymore. It felt occupied, as if something had passed through and taken the sound with it. Iona stepped into the village slowly, each footfall careful, almost reverent, like she was walking through a memory that refused to speak back. The lodges stood exactly as they had been, hides stretched tight, tools left where hands had once placed them. Nothing broken, nothing scattered, just absence. That was what made it worse. Jesse followed a few steps behind, his eyes moving constantly, scanning, measuring. He did not touch anything. He understood enough to know this place was not his to disturb. Iona moved toward the center fire pit. The ashes were cold. She knelt beside it, pressing her fingers gently into the gray dust. No warmth. Not for a long time. Her chest tightened. They were not rushed, she said quietly. They were gathered. Jesse stopped behind her. You mean they went willingly? Iona shook her head slowly. No. My people would not leave everything behind unless they had no choice. She stood, her eyes sharper now, no longer searching for hope, but for truth. She walked toward one of the lodges and paused at the entrance. The flap moved slightly with the wind. Inside, everything was still. A blanket folded. A bowl half filled with dried corn. A child's carving resting near the wall. Life interrupted. She reached down and picked up the carving. Her fingers tightened around it. They were told to go, she said. Not forced. Not chased. Led. Jesse frowned slightly. Led where? Iona stepped back outside, her gaze sweeping the horizon again. Then she turned slowly, looking past the village, toward the narrow pass on the far side of the valley. The ground there was marked. Faint, but clear if you knew how to see. Lines in the dirt. Direction. Purpose. There, she said. Jesse followed her gaze, then nodded once. That many people moving together, they would leave a trail. Iona began walking toward it without hesitation. Jesse moved beside her. We should be careful, he said. Whoever did this, they planned it. Iona did not slow. Then we cannot waste time. Her voice had changed. The fear was still there, but it had hardened into something steadier. Resolve. When they reached the edge of the pass, Jesse crouched down, studying the ground again. He brushed his hand lightly over the dirt, tracing the marks left behind. Wagons, he said. At least 2. Maybe more. Iona's jaw tightened. My people do not use wagons. Jesse glanced up at her. Which means someone brought them. The wind picked up again, carrying dust through the narrow path ahead. It looked like just another stretch of land. But now it meant something else. Iona stepped forward, stopping just before entering the pass. She looked back once at the empty village. The place that had been full of voices, of firelight, of life. Now silent. Waiting. She closed her eyes for a brief moment. Not in grief. Not yet. In promise. When she opened them again, there was no hesitation left. We follow, she said. Jesse stood beside her, adjusting the strap on his saddle. He did not ask questions. He did not argue. He simply nodded. We follow. They mounted their horses again, turning toward the narrow path where the trail disappeared into shadow. The sun was lower now, casting long lines across the valley behind them. Ahead, the land stretched unknown, quiet, and waiting. And somewhere beyond that silence, were answers neither of them were ready for. The pass narrowed as they rode in, the walls of stone rising on both sides like silent witnesses. The light dimmed with every yard, the sun falling behind the ridge until only a thin line of gold remained above them. Iona rode ahead now, her posture straight, her eyes fixed forward. She was no longer searching. She was following. Jesse stayed just behind her, watching the ground, the walls, the sky above. Every detail mattered now. The trail was clearer here. Wagon wheels pressed deep into the dirt, hooves layered over hooves, a path carved by intention, not chance. After nearly a mile, the pass opened slightly, enough for the wind to move again. It carried something with it. Not sound, not voices, but the faint trace of smoke. Jesse noticed it first. He lifted his head, drawing in a slow breath. "You smell that?" he asked quietly. Iona did not answer with words. She nodded once, already urging her horse forward. The pace quickened, not reckless, but urgent. The land began to slope downward, the path widening just enough to reveal what lay beyond. They reached the edge at the same time. Both of them stopped. Below, in a shallow basin surrounded by rock, stood a camp. Not a village. Not like hers. This was different. Structured. Ordered. Wagons in a circle. Horses tied in rows. And near the center, people. Iona's people. Her breath caught, but she did not move. She watched. Carefully. No panic. No chaos. The people below were moving. Slowly. Controlled. Watched. Jesse narrowed his eyes, studying the scene. "They are not being hurt," he said quietly. "They are being held." Iona's fingers tightened around the reins. "Why?" she whispered. Jesse did not answer right away. Because the answer was not in the ground. It was in the details. And then he saw it. Near the largest wagon, standing apart from the others, was a man, well dressed for this land. Not a drifter. Not a wanderer. Someone with purpose. Someone who planned things. Jesse's jaw tightened slightly. "I have seen men like that before," he said. Iona glanced at him. "What kind of men?" Jesse kept his eyes on the camp. "The kind that do not take land with guns," he said quietly. "They take it with paper and people." Iona looked back at her tribe, at the way they stood together, not broken, not scattered. Waiting. She understood then. This was not an attack. It was a claim. Someone had decided her people belonged somewhere else, and was moving them like pieces on a board. Her breath steadied. Her fears shifted. Not gone. Just changed. "We cannot rush in," Jesse said. "Not yet." Iona nodded slowly. For the first time since they entered the pass, she stepped back. Not away, just enough to think. The wind moved again, carrying dust across the edge of the basin. Jesse turned slightly, studying her face. "You got a plan?" he asked. Iona looked at the camp one more time. Then she looked at the small piece of cloth still wrapped in her hand. The one she had carried since the village. She closed her fingers around it. Tight. "Not a plan," she said quietly. "A truth." Jesse raised an eyebrow slightly. Iona stepped forward just enough to be seen if someone looked up. "Not hidden. Not afraid. They think we are alone," she said. "They think we have no voice." Jesse watched her, understanding beginning to form. And Iona's eyes did not leave the camp. "They are wrong." The wind carried her words down into the basin. Not loud, not shouted, but steady. And for the first time, one of the men below looked up. Then another. Jesse exhaled slowly, a faint smile touching the corner of his mouth. Not because this would be easy, but because now it was clear. Out here, justice did not begin with a gun. It began with someone willing to stand, and not